Hi guys, Pete the Wargamer here, back with another Warhammer 40k painting tutorial. This time I'll be showing you how to paint the Chaos Space Marine Haarken Worldclaimer. However, instead of painting him in the usual Black Legion scheme, which I've already covered in a recent tutorial, I'll instead be painting him in a Sons of Horus style, and I'll be using the Citadel range of paints to do so. Before we can begin painting, we first of all need to prime. I've chosen grey as my base colour as it will really help with applying the greens of Haarken's armour. I've also opted to use an airbrush primer, but feel free to choose your own brand and method of priming. I've also only partly assembled the miniature and have kept a number of these items separate to make painting those tricky areas much easier. This was achieved by very simply drilling a small hole with a pin vise and using a small bit of superglue to attach a length of wire to hold onto. We can kick things off by painting the sea green armour of the miniature, but before you do, you'll want to water down your paint. This is a process that will be repeated throughout all the base coats that we'll be applying in this video. So take your paint, in this case Cabalite Green, and mix it with a little water. Add some water in small amounts until your paint has a consistency similar to what you see here. With your Cabalite Green thinned, you can then start to paint the armour of Haarken. As this paint isn't a base paint, you will need to apply this paint in several layers, allowing each layer to dry thoroughly before applying the next. Building up your layers steadily in this way will result in a much smoother base colour. For the areas between the armour panels and the pipes around the collar and mask, we want to apply a base coat of Abaddon Black. Take care with this step as there may be some hard to reach areas. Use a small brush if needed and take care when painting around the armour panels that we've already base coated. To paint the wrapping around the handle of the spear, we want to begin with the base colour of Rhinox Hide. This will help us to achieve a dark reddish brown leather effect. To paint the areas of skin on Haarken's head and also the pipes as well as the bones and teeth dotted about the miniature, we'll be starting off with a base coat of Rakarth flesh. This will give us the perfect starting point for achieving that pallid skin tone and bleached bone colour alike. To paint the eyes and the area inside the gaping maw on the leg face, we want to start off with Celestra Grey. This light grey colour will serve as the jumping off point for some later washes to give this area a yellowish hue. For the slightly more angular looking skull among the more human skulls hanging from the belt, we'll be painting it with Khome Red. This will allow us to give the skull a deep red colour that will stand out against the bleach bone skulls next to it. For the brighter red areas such as the loincloth, the lenses in the mask and the cloth scraps on the trophy rack, we'll be starting off with a base coat of Mephiston Red. The last few areas to base coat are the metallics. We'll be starting off with the dark silver of Leadbelcher to paint the various areas of bare steel across the miniature. These include the blade of the spear, chains and intake vents of the jump pack. Metallic paints can be much more difficult to cover over if you overspill, so make sure you take your time with this particular step. To paint the frames of the trophy rack and also the banding and adornments of Haarken's armour, we'll be using Balthasar Gold to give us that bronzed metal effect. The final base coat to apply is one of Retributor Armour. We'll be using this to paint the tips of the spikes on Haarken's trophy racks, the detailing of the spear as well as some of the adornments on the armour. Once you've completed this step, make sure that you thoroughly clean out your brushes and paint water as you do not want to cross-contaminate the metal flakes found in these last few paints into your other non-metallic paints. So at this stage our miniature has all of the base colours, but it's looking a little bland as the details aren't quite as obvious as they should be. This can be remedied by applying some washes. Washes are pigments in a much thinner medium that allows them to flow and pool into recesses, giving the effect of shading and therefore deeper recesses. This will ultimately help to achieve a much more realistic looking appearance. The first wash to use is Nuln Oil, and we'll be using this in two ways. The first will see us painting the wash directly into the recesses of the armour. By applying the wash in this way, we can maintain the green colouring of the armour. Using a thin brush and mixing in just a drop of water with your wash will really help with this step. The second method of application will see us applying the same wash as before, but over the entirety of the silver metallic, brown and dark red areas, not just in the recesses. This will darken the overall colour of these surfaces, as well as creating that deeper shading in the recesses. Using Reikland Flesh Shade, we next want to wash over both of the fleshy areas. I would suggest mixing in a little water or preferably some Lamium Medium for this step. This will reduce the strength of the wash, helping to bring out the details in the facial features and pipes, whilst also maintaining that pallid skin appearance. For the areas that we base coated with Celestra Grey, we want to create a slight fiery glow. This can be achieved with a wash of Cassandori Yellow. Focus the application of the wash mainly to the bottom of the mouth so that the yellow coloration of the wash creates a transition from white at the top to yellowy orange at the very bottom. To add some shading to the bright red, bronze and gold areas of the miniature, you'll want to use Agrax Earthshade. This will maintain the richness of the colours, especially the red, whilst adding the effects of shadow into the recessed areas. You can also use some of this wash in a similar way to how we applied the null oil by targeting it into some of the metal areas to give them a slightly rusted and oily appearance. For the areas of bone on the miniature that we painted with Rakor flesh, you'll want to apply a thin layer of Seraphim Sepia. The wash will slightly darken down the bone colour whilst helping to bring out those details. With our washes completed, we can now move on to applying some edge highlights. Edge highlights are great for bringing out smaller details and creating sharp looking edges. To do this, take a brush with a fine point and dip it into some slightly watered down paint that is lighter than the base coat. Then use this brush to paint on a thin line along the raised edges. We'll be starting off with the sea green armour, and for this we'll be using an edge highlight of Sybarite green. Before we continue with the highlights, I'll next be adding some optional battle damage to the armour to give it an aged and damaged appearance. To do this, I'll be starting off with small unordered specks and lines of Rhinox Hide across the armour to represent small rusted nicks in the paintwork. Next, we can apply what I call an extreme highlight of Gauss Blaster Green. These are great for helping certain aspects of the model stand out even more. Extreme highlighting follows the same principle as regular highlighting, but you will only apply this highlight to the more prominent edges, such as corners and other focus points. In addition to the extreme highlighting, we can also apply some of this paint around the bottom edges of the dark brown scratches. This creates the illusion that the damage has a slight three-dimensional appearance to them. When it comes to highlighting the black areas, we want to approach it in two different steps. The first set of black areas to highlight are those between the armour panels. For these parts, I'll be applying a thin line of Eshin Grey. The remaining black areas are the pipes around the collar and the mask. We want to give these a slightly greyish brown colour, and so I'll be highlighting them using Storm Vermin Fur. For the strips of leather wrapped around the spear handle, we want to continue that dark reddish brown appearance. This can easily be achieved by running a thin line of Doombull Brown along the folds and edges of the strips. Applying a few small dots of Skrag Brown to some of the creases in the leather strips will give the leather a very slightly worn effect. You can also continue with the aged effect of the armour by mixing together a little Skrag Brown with some Lamium Medium in 2-part medium to 1-part paint mixture. Using this mixture, you can then apply it to some of the brown scratches and various other points across the armour. By creating some small vertical runs down the armour, starting from the scratches and some of the banding, you can create the effect that rust has formed and started to spread across the panels. This results in an armour that doesn't appear to have been well kept or maintained over the many years. For the red areas such as the skull, lenses and cloth, start off with an edge highlight of Evil Sunz Scarlet. For the cloth, this may require a degree of freehand work for some of the folds, as you want to paint a thin line vertically down the centre of these folds. We can also use this paint to start work on the glowing runes of the spear. Begin by painting the inset areas of the runes before painting some overspilling light onto the areas around them. I find that mixing in a little Lamium Medium here will help with this. Create a mixture of 1 part red paint and 2 parts Lamium Medium. Paint the first thin layer to the outer bounds of the globe, allow it to dry and apply another layer over the top, but this time reducing the distance from the runes that you paint. Repeat the step by reducing the distance each time, which should create the effect of a brighter red closer to where the runes are. Using a similar technique to how we tackled the green armour, apply a small amount of non-oil into the recesses of the runes. Using some Troll Slayer orange, highlight the edges of the runes. This bright orange should contrast strongly against the shading that we added in the last step. The final step in painting the rich colouring of the red areas is to apply a small extreme highlight of Fire Dragon Bite over the bottom of the lines that you painted on the previous step. You can also use Fire Dragon Bright as an extreme highlight to the runes that we've been painting in the last few steps as well. To finish off the flesh coloured areas, I'll be using some Deepkin flesh to pick out the raised details of the face, head and organic pipes. You can also use this paint to create some areas of worn fabric on the loincloth. To achieve this effect, use a thin brush to paint some small lines emanating from the bottom of the fabric, running vertically and diagonally away from the edge. This will create a fading over the red, resulting in a threadbare appearance. To enhance the glowing effect of the yellow, you can paint a small, thin, horizontal line of white to the top of the mouth and to the eyes. You can also use this paint to add a small dot of reflection to any optics on the miniature. Also, when moving on to using very light paints such as this, I would recommend first refreshing your paint water to prevent any cross-contamination of other colours and pigments. For the skulls and other bony protrusions, we want to achieve a bleached bone effect. Applying the very pale Ashanti bone along the raised edges of these areas will help to create this appearance. For the bronze coloured areas, apply a thin line of Gehenna's gold along the edges. Be very careful at this stage as it can be tricky to resolve overspills of metallic paints. The final edge highlight to apply is Stormhost Silver, and this will be applied to all of the remaining gold and silver parts of the miniature. The thin bright silver line will create the effect of metal reflecting light off its most prominent parts. The final step is another weathering technique and also optional. This time we'll be mixing in some Sotek Green and Lamia Medium together in 3 parts medium to 1 part paint. This thin blue-green mixture can then be applied to the bronze areas to create a verdigris effect. Focus the application around some of the rivets and details, but apply the mixture sparingly, as when it comes to weathering, sometimes less is often more. And here we have the completed Haarken Worldclaimer. I finished things off by varnishing and assembling the components before creating a simple basing scheme using some textured paints. I've also painted the Ultramarine Corpse following the same techniques described in my Marnius Calgar tutorial, with the addition of some Agrax Earthshade over the armour to give it a dirty appearance. You can find a full list of all the paints that I've used in this tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment that I've used to create this video, such as my Everlasting Wet Palette. If you enjoyed this video, do let me know in the comments below, and if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out my Patreon page if you would like to support me in making these videos. If you have any questions or would just like to chat with others who enjoy my channel, I've set up a Discord server which you can find a link to in the description below. And so the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching, and goodbye